You won't believe what King Charles just said after Prince Harry asked him to reunite. He's as mad as Meghan. Just days ago, Prince Harry extended an unexpected olive branch, inviting the royal family, including his estranged father King Charles, to the 2027 Invictus Games. But instead of hope, it triggered fury. Behind palace walls, Charles reportedly exploded. His biting remark comparing Harry's mental state to Meghan Markle's has stunned insiders and royal watchers alike. Is this Harry's genuine attempt at reconciliation, or a calculated PR move? And has King Charles just slammed the door on peace forever? Stay with us, because what happens next might reshape the monarchy's future. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Under a grey London sky, far removed from the sun-soaked avenues of Montecito where Prince Harry now resides, the walls of Buckingham Palace once again trembled. Not from the echoes of history, but from the tremors of a modern family war boiling into the public sphere. Just when it seemed like the distance and time had dulled the edge of royal hostility, an unexpected invitation reignited everything. It began with a letter. No fanfare. No advance warning. No formal diplomatic buffer. Just a personalized invitation from Prince Harry's office, sent directly to King Charles III, Prince William, Princess Anne, and other senior members of the royal household. The contents? A sincere, perhaps even heartfelt, appeal for reconciliation masked beneath an official envelope, an invitation to the 2027 Invictus Games. The event, founded by Harry himself, has always been presented as a celebration of resilience, unity, and human triumph. But now, it was about to become the latest battlefield in a cold, passive-aggressive war between a father and a son. The king's reaction was not mild, and it certainly wasn't diplomatic. According to multiple insider sources close to the palace, King Charles exploded in private upon reading the invitation. One aide claimed he read it twice before setting it down and muttering, "He's just as mad as his wife." The comparison, blunt and pointed, showed that the shadow of Meghan Markle still loomed heavily over every decision Harry made, at least in the eyes of his father. The timing of the invite was no accident. With the monarchy undergoing subtle transitions, whispers about Charles's long-term health, and William stepping further into the foreground of royal duties, Harry likely believed this was his last real window to mend fences while his father still reigned. Perhaps he envisioned the games as neutral ground, sacred in its cause, safe in its intentions. But what he failed to calculate, critics say, is the simmering contempt that remains in the royal bloodstream for what they see as his betrayal, one made more grievous by the Netflix documentaries, the memoir Spare, and the Oprah tell-all that once cast a long shadow over the family's most sacred principles: loyalty, unity, and discretion. The optics were challenging from the outset. Harry's letter, framed in the tone of unity and healing, came on the heels of yet another public appearance where he failed to mention his family in any meaningful way. And although the Invictus Games stand for noble causes, the palace couldn't help but view this move as yet another attempt to launder personal regret through public charity. It was less about healing and more about headlines. But let's not forget who Prince Harry is. This is the same boy who walked behind his mother's coffin before he even had a chance to process what loss meant. The same man who watched his father marry the woman who, for years, was the third person in his parents' marriage. The same royal who had always seemed to carry within him a mix of rebellion and loyalty, confusion and clarity, privilege and pain. For Harry, Invictus was never just about wounded soldiers. It was about his own scars too, mental, emotional, generational. It was about finding a tribe, a purpose, a mission that wasn't governed by palace tradition. So inviting his family was not just ceremonial, it was personal. It was his way of saying, "See what I've built outside your world. Come and be a part of it." But from King Charles's perspective, the timing couldn't have been worse. His reign has been marked by a careful strategy: modernize, stabilize, and unify. The last thing he needed was a media frenzy centered around Harry, dredging up past wounds. According to a palace source, the king didn't even discuss the invitation with William or Camilla before making up his mind. He simply put it down, scoffed, and said, "Tell him it's not appropriate." The refusal wasn't official, not at first. There was no statement issued, no press release, no leak to the media. But within 72 hours, the story broke, thanks to a reporter embedded close to Harry's PR team who framed the snub as proof that the royals were uninterested in reconciliation. And just like that, A gesture that was meant to build bridges instead exposed the deep fault lines still running through Britain's most famous family. But here's where the story deepens. Was the invitation truly a heartfelt attempt at reunion? Or was it a cleverly veiled provocation, meant to shift the public narrative back in Harry's favor? That question has sparked intense debate across social platforms, opinion columns, and TV panels. One British anchor said, "Harry is either the most persistent peacemaker or the most cunning strategist the monarchy's ever produced." Another commentator shot back, "He just wants to look like the bigger man without admitting he lit the fire in the first place." To understand the intensity of Charles's fury, one must also understand the monarchy's concept of hierarchy and control. Inviting the monarch to an event where he is not the central figure, one created and hosted by a royal exile, was always going to be controversial. To Charles, it likely felt like being summoned to the court of a rebellious prince who now wore a different kind of crown, one not of tradition, but of influence. Harry has become a symbol of resistance, whether he intended to or not, and in monarchy, resistance, no matter how noble, is insubordination. In private, some senior royals reportedly found the gesture endearing, if naive. Princess and is said to have voiced measured support, though stopped short of agreeing to attend. William, predictably, was livid. Not just because of the invite, but because it once again forced him to navigate the emotional minefield his brother's actions always seemed to detonate. It was another case of Harry breaks something, and William's left holding the fragments, as one aide put it. Yet for all the backlash, there are those within palace walls and beyond who saw the invitation as a rare olive branch. Not a perfect one, certainly not one offered with clean hands, but an olive branch nonetheless. The world, after all, has changed. Public expectations of the royal family have evolved, and younger generations no longer revere the monarchy as blindly as their parents did. For many, Harry represents a flawed but relatable figure. A man who walked away from a golden cage to try and build something authentic. Inviting his family to be part of that creation was, to them, a sign of growth, not manipulation. But if the response he received is any indication, the royal court does not view evolution with the same enthusiasm. Charles's fury, his raw, blunt dismissal, echoed louder than perhaps he intended. Telling insiders that Harry was as mad as Meghan was not just a dig at Harry's mental state or judgment. It was a coded message that Meghan remains the wedge that broke the wheel. It was also, intentionally or not, a dismissal of the couple's entire worldview, where openness, emotion, and media transparency clash with royal stoicism. It's ironic. The very values that the Invictus Games stand for, courage, unity, resilience, are the same values the royal family seems unable to extend toward one of its own. And in turning down the invitation, Charles may have thought he was protecting the dignity of the crown. But in doing so, he may have only underscored the emotional distance that defines his relationship with his youngest son. As the 2027 Invictus Games inch closer, the question remains: will anyone from the royal family show up? Or has the bridge between Harry and the monarchy been not just burned, but paved over with a cold new silence? And perhaps more importantly, what does this tell us about the cost of healing? In families, in institutions, in ourselves? The air in the private offices of Buckingham Palace was unusually tense that morning. Somewhere between the briefing on upcoming state visits and a quiet update on princess and scheduled engagements, a courier handed over a sealed envelope. Not from a foreign dignitary, not from Parliament, but from Prince Harry. The envelope bore no royal crest, no formal seal, just the unmistakable, handwritten signature of a man who had once been the pride of the British Army, now the estranged Duke of Sussex. It was addressed to King Charles III and marked personal and confidential. The assistant paused briefly before handing it over to the king's private secretary, not realizing the document would trigger one of the sharpest emotional eruptions in months inside the royal household. Inside the envelope was an official invitation to the 2027 Invictus Games, a global sports competition for wounded, injured, and sick servicemen and women. The event, founded by Harry in 2014, had grown to international prominence and was widely celebrated as a humanitarian triumph. However, this letter wasn't just about inviting a monarch to a public sporting event. It was a plea, layered, calculated, emotional, for a symbolic reunion. Every sentence of the letter was worded with care, bearing the tone of a man attempting humility while preserving dignity. The letter opened by expressing hope that the king was in good health and gratitude for Charles's ongoing support of the Commonwealth. Then came the central message. An earnest request for King Charles, Prince William, Princess Anne, and even Queen Camilla to attend the opening ceremony of the 2027 Invictus Games. Harry expressed a desire for a moment of shared unity and described the games as a bridge between the past and the future. For Harry, the invitation represented more than a guest list. It was a symbolic restoration of a broken bond. The event was to be held in Toronto, Canada, the very city where Harry had first been spotted publicly with Meghan Markle back in 2017. It was a full-circle moment, one he envisioned as a healing opportunity. But inside the palace, the invitation landed like a bomb. No one had expected it. No communication had preceded it. No staff members were warned. And worst of all, from the royal family's perspective, the media got hold of the story before any internal decision could be made. Within 48 hours of the letter reaching the king, a British tabloid published a story claiming Harry was extending an olive branch to his father and hoping for reconciliation. The leak was not traced to the palace. All signs pointed towards someone within Harry's media circle, a move that, once confirmed, sent a wave of suspicion across Buckingham Palace. Palace protocol dictates that family correspondence, particularly one that implies public appearances, be handled delicately. To bypass those channels and have such an invitation reach the king directly, only to see it splashed across international headlines days later, was seen as either naive or provocatively strategic. The royal household convened a quiet meeting to assess the situation. It included a senior courtier, the king's press secretary, and 2 private aides. Early reports from those inside the meeting said Charles was visibly frustrated, pacing the room in a rare display of temper. When asked how he wanted to respond, he allegedly waved off the aides and muttered under his breath, "He's as mad as Meghan." It was a brutal, off-the-cuff remark, one not intended to leak, but it did. And that leak escalated everything. It was the comment heard around the world. "He's as mad as Meghan" became the leading quote in media coverage for days. Royal commentators speculated whether Charles had finally lost all patience with his son. American media outlets called it a cold-blooded dismissal. British papers, more familiar with the palace's underlying frustrations, described it as long overdue honesty. While many focused on the king's insult, few noticed a more subtle shift. The royal family was not just rejecting Harry's olive branch, they were doing so in a way that underscored how deeply the wounds remained. This was not just about protocol. It was personal. One of the most delicate aspects of the entire situation was how the other royal family members responded to the invitation. Prince William, according to royal insiders, was the first to be consulted by the king after reading the letter. The Duke of Cambridge was reportedly furious. In his view, the Invictus Games had become more of a branding tool for Harry and Meghan than the noble, veteran-centered initiative it once was. William's private comments to a close aide were sharp. "He's inviting us to play extras in his show." It was a stinging observation, one that spoke to the growing perception within the palace that Harry was using every possible public platform to rewrite the narrative, pulling his family into appearances to serve a larger personal arc. Princess Anne, the no-nonsense pillar of royal duty, was far more pragmatic. She reportedly viewed the invitation as an unnecessary distraction and advised her brother to decline politely without public comment. Still, even Anne, who had remained relatively neutral in the Sussex scandal, was said to be quietly disappointed that Harry had chosen to go through the press instead of making the matter a private discussion. Queen Camilla's reaction was perhaps the most subdued, at least publicly. She reportedly told Charles, "You know what he's doing," and moved on. Behind closed doors, she remained wary of any attempts that could thrust her back into negative headlines, especially those rekindling Diana comparisons or family disloyalty. The entire scenario was becoming untenable. By the 5th day after the invitation became public, social media was ablaze with hashtags supporting Harry's gesture and condemning the royal family's perceived pettiness. Others, however, argued that the games were being used as a Trojan horse, a pretext for inserting drama into an event meant for healing. Caught in the middle were the actual veterans and athletes who were supposed to be the heart of the Invictus Games. Several spoke anonymously to media outlets expressing concern that the entire narrative was shifting away from their triumphs and challenges toward another royal soap opera. The organizing committee of the 2027 Games released a vague statement thanking all parties who had supported the initiative over the years and reminding the public that the event was for veterans, not politics. But the damage had already been done. Once the story gained traction, the Games became a litmus test for royal loyalty. Would they show up and lend their presence to unity? Or would they stay away and underline the deep fractures within? Perhaps the most surprising voice in the conversation came from an unlikely source, one of Harry's former military colleagues who had been instrumental in the early years of Invictus. In a candid interview with a veterans podcast, he said, "Harry's heart has always been in the right place, but his timing is abysmal. The idea was noble. The execution was all wrong." The quote summed up the central dilemma facing the royal family. If they attended, they risked being accused of legitimizing Harry's attempts to regain public favor. If they declined, they appeared vindictive and cold. It was a lose-lose situation. Back in Montecito, Harry reportedly told friends that he had expected some resistance, but didn't anticipate such a fierce backlash. He was, sources claimed, genuinely hurt by the king's reaction, particularly the mention of Meghan in such a disparaging way. For Harry, the Games were not about reopening wounds but offering a path forward. Yet from the very moment the letter landed at Buckingham Palace, it had the opposite effect. Whether it was pride, protocol, or pain that guided the king's response, one thing became clear in the aftermath. Harry's place in the royal family remained as ambiguous, fragile, and controversial as ever. Inside the corridors of Clarence House, where the walls are adorned with portraits of monarchs past and the silence speaks louder than most words, King Charles was pacing. The letter had arrived, the words read more than once, and yet his hands remained clenched as though physically restraining a storm within. This wasn't the reaction of a statesman managing an inconvenient request. This was the raw, unfiltered rage of a father who felt manipulated again. According to aides present at the time, Charles had received the letter in his private study early that morning, before his daily briefings. A silver tray, polished to mirror-like perfection, held the unassuming envelope. He picked it up absent-mindedly, assuming it might be from a diplomatic channel. But as his eyes scanned the name at the bottom, Harry, his posture stiffened. He paused, unfolded the letter slowly, and began to read. It was well-written, polite, strategic, and in its tone, deceptively warm. But it was the content that caused his stomach to knot. The request was clear. Harry wanted Charles, along with key members of the royal family, to attend the 2027 Invictus Games in Toronto. He emphasized the theme of unity. He referenced family. He closed with words that might have been touching had they not carried the weight of 2 years of public attacks and embarrassing revelations. "I hope this moment might begin to heal what time alone has failed to mend," the letter read in part. The king did not finish reading it aloud. Instead, he tossed the letter onto the antique desk with an audible thump and turned toward the window, arms folded tightly. Outside, the weather matched his mood, gray, uncertain, flickering with the potential for a storm. When an aide quietly asked if he should prepare a formal response, the king snapped, not with rage, but with exhaustion. "He's as mad as his wife," he muttered, loud enough to be heard, yet soft enough to carry the weight of years buried beneath his voice. Those words, unintended for the public ear, would later become the centerpiece of tabloid headlines. But in that moment, they were not a performance. They were the king's private truth slipping through royal composure. To understand the depth of his reaction, one must examine what this letter truly meant in Charles's world. It wasn't just an invitation to a sporting event. It was a strategic move that forced his hand into an impossible position. If he refused the invite outright, he risked being seen as cold, vindictive, unwilling to reconcile. If he accepted, he would be stepping onto a stage crafted entirely by Harry, one where every camera lens would search for glances, body language, tension. Every word he uttered would be dissected. Every smile, every sigh, every silence. For a monarch trained in subtlety, discretion, and duty, the Games were not neutral ground, they were Harry's ground. And what incensed Charles more than the invitation itself was the suspicion, almost certainty, that the press would soon know. Not because the palace leaked it, but because Harry's camp, time and again, had found ways to plant stories that shaped narratives long before the crown could respond. Within hours of receiving the invitation, Charles convened a small group of trusted advisors. The goal was to decide on a strategy, acknowledge receipt, decline gracefully, or stay silent and wait for the media cycle to pass. But there was no masking the king's frustration. "He has no comprehension of what he's done," Charles reportedly said, walking circles around the room. No respect for timing. No understanding of the damage already done. Now he wants us to stand behind him like this never happened. One senior aide attempted to play devil's advocate, suggesting that perhaps this was Harry's genuine effort to make amends. Charles scoffed. You don't make amends by issuing public invitations for private healing. You call. You come home. You apologize. This isn't a gesture, it's theater. It became increasingly clear that Charles viewed the invitation not as reconciliation, but as control. In his mind, Harry was not reaching out with humility, but with the confidence of someone who had learned how to manipulate public opinion. And from Charles's view, every time Harry had extended a hand, it came with strings. The mention of Meghan only added fuel. For Charles, Meghan represented the catalyst of the family's unraveling, not because she was American, not because she was an actress, but because she challenged the institution with defiance instead of deference. In his eyes, she pulled Harry away from duty, from legacy, from identity. And now, seeing Harry act in a way that mirrored Meghan's approach to optics, bold, public, emotionally persuasive, was enough to break any restraint he had left. The royal family, despite its carefully maintained public face, has always depended on internal structure, private dialogue, and disciplined silence. It is a system built on long memory and strategic distance. In contrast, Harry and Meghan's brand thrives on openness, emotional transparency, and a mastery of media narratives. The letter, to Charles, was not just unwelcome, it was a Trojan horse carrying with it all the elements of their media playbook. Behind closed doors, other family members were briefed. William, perhaps the most personally affected, was told first. His reaction, much like his father's, was swift and biting. What does he want now? He reportedly said. He spent years tearing this family apart in public, and now he wants to pose with us for cameras? Charles's reaction hardened further after hearing William's stance. There was no longer a question about attending the games. It was now about how to frame the rejection in a way that didn't deepen the already cavernous divide between palace and public perception. For that, the king turned to his media team. But even among his closest advisors, opinions were divided. Some urged a muted response, an acknowledgement of the invite with a regretfully unable to attend reply. Others advocated total silence, knowing that engaging could lead to follow-up attacks, more leaks, and perhaps even news sources from Harry's side who would misrepresent the tone of private responses. Ultimately, Charles settled on no formal reply at all, not immediately. He opted to say nothing, trusting that time and palace silence would do what words could not, maintain distance and avoid escalation. But even silence, in the royal family, speaks volumes. The effect of this decision rippled across the royal court. Staff members began to adjust public schedules to ensure there was no accidental overlap or media speculation that any royal engagement near the Invictus Games would be tied to Harry's event. Members of the Queen's press office were instructed to be extremely cautious when responding to questions about the Games. Meanwhile, Charles made a point of increasing his public visibility in the days following the incident. He appeared at a hospital opening, attended an art exhibition, and even conducted a highly publicized meeting with the Prime Minister, each moment carefully captured, his expressions measured, his posture composed. It was his way of reminding the public, he is the sovereign, not a participant in his son's storyline. Still, the comment, he's as mad as his wife, refused to die in the media. Though the palace never officially confirmed the statement, the quote gained traction fast. Tabloids ran with it. American late-night hosts joked about it. Royal biographers dissected it. And public opinion, as always, split down ideological lines. Some sympathized with the king. They saw his words as an expression of grief masked by rage. A father betrayed. A monarch tested. Others, however, saw cruelty in the comparison, interpreting the remark as an echo of outdated notions about mental health and strong women disrupting tradition. For Harry, the impact was immediate. Privately, he expressed deep hurt that his father would use Meghan's name in such a derogatory context. According to a source close to the Sussexes, Harry felt that the comment not only disrespected his wife but reduced all of his recent efforts to petty madness. It was like nothing he does will ever be enough, the source claimed. And perhaps that is the core of Charles's explosive reaction. Not just anger, not just wounded pride, but the creeping realization that the chasm between himself and his son has grown so wide, even the noblest of causes can't build a bridge across it. For all the ways Prince Harry has tried to redefine his identity since stepping away from royal duties, there remains one truth that continues to haunt both the monarchy and public discourse. The mention of Meghan Markle's name is never neutral. In fact, in the corridors of power and within the tightly locked gates of Buckingham Palace, it is more than a name. It is a scar, a symbol, and a source of irreparable tension. When King Charles uttered those now infamous words, "He's as mad as his wife," he wasn't just venting frustration. He was dragging into the open a festering wound the royal family has long tried to ignore. That simple sentence, murmured in a moment of anger and disbelief, set off alarm bells not only within the palace but throughout the entire global media ecosystem. To outsiders, it was a punchline. To the monarchy, it was a betrayal of discipline. But to those who have followed this saga from the very beginning, it was something more, a reminder that despite all the polished statements, carefully crafted public appearances, and symbolic gestures of unity, the fault lines that cracked the family in 2020 had never truly healed. The context in which Meghan's name was invoked made the situation even more volatile. Harry's invitation to the 2027 Invictus Games was widely perceived as an olive branch, an attempt to bring the family together under the noble cause of supporting wounded veterans. But for Charles, and indeed for others in the royal fold, it was seen through a different lens, an echo of a tactic that Meghan herself had employed many times before. In their view, it bore the unmistakable stamp of the Sussex PR model: high-profile, emotionally charged, and impossible to ignore. And so when Charles equated Harry's actions with Meghan's perceived recklessness, he wasn't merely criticizing a single decision. He was condemning a pattern. To understand the gravity of that, one must revisit the many ways in which Meghan's presence reshaped the dynamics within the royal family. From the moment her relationship with Harry became public, the institution found itself on unfamiliar ground. Meghan was outspoken, charismatic, and culturally American in every sense of the word. She was also biracial, divorced, and professionally successful before ever setting foot in royal life. None of these facts should have been revolutionary in a modern monarchy, but they were. Behind closed doors, her integration into the family was not seamless. Tension surfaced early on, especially in relation to protocol, press coverage, and her role within the hierarchy. Staff turnover during her time at Kensington Palace became a subject of tabloid fascination. Reports, many of them anonymous, painted a picture of a duchess who clashed with aides, challenged traditions, and failed to conform. Then came the defining moment, the 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey. In a 2-hour primetime special, Meghan and Harry pulled the veil back on what they described as a deeply toxic environment within the monarchy. Meghan revealed suicidal thoughts and a stunning claim that an unnamed royal expressed concerns over their unborn son's skin color. Harry, for his part, confirmed that the couple felt abandoned by his family when they needed them most. The damage was immediate and vast. Within days, headlines across the world labeled the royal family as an institution plagued by racism, emotional cruelty, and generational dysfunction. For supporters of the monarchy, the interview was seen as an act of betrayal. For supporters of Harry and Meghan, it was a brave stand against an antiquated system. Regardless of interpretation, the fact remains, that moment changed everything. So when King Charles invoked Meghan's name in response to the Invictus invitation, he wasn't just expressing frustration. He was dredging up that history, the pain, the embarrassment, the global backlash. The monarchy had spent years trying to move on from that scandal, painstakingly rebuilding its image, particularly in the wake of Queen Elizabeth II's death. Charles himself had worked diligently to present a modernized version of the crown, streamlined, accessible, and apolitical. But in that one sentence, he revealed what many had long suspected: Meghan Markle was still very much at the center of the family's internal storm. Her name, her presence, her legacy within the royal narrative remained a point of contention that no amount of public silence could erase. Interestingly, Meghan herself made no public comment on the incident. Her camp remained entirely quiet. No spokesperson, no leaked Instagram post, no carefully curated podcast discussion. This silence was interpreted in many ways. Some saw it as a sign of maturity, that she refused to engage in what could become another public feud. Others believed it was part of a larger strategy, a deliberate choice to remain above the fray and let the institution continue to unravel on its own. But insiders say Meghan was far from indifferent. Sources close to the Duchess claimed she was deeply hurt by the king's remark, not just because it was insulting, but because it reasserted the palace's long-standing narrative that she was the one who had derailed Harry, not the outdated system that failed to accommodate them. One friend reportedly told a journalist, "It's as if nothing she endured ever mattered, as if the pain she spoke about on global television was just a performance to them." What's more, Meghan's continued association with controversy has made her an easy scapegoat. Every move Harry makes, be it a book release, an interview, or a global initiative like INVICTUS, is often framed as a byproduct of her influence. Rarely is he seen as acting independently. The assumption persists that Meghan is the mastermind behind every headline, every disruption, every attempt to shift the narrative. This dynamic has created a paradox for the Sussexes. On one hand, Meghan is often accused of dominating Harry. On the other, she is criticized for not being visible enough, for letting Harry face media storms alone. The result is a no-win situation that fuels royal anxiety with every passing appearance. The impact on public perception is equally polarizing. Among younger and more progressive demographics, Meghan is often seen as a victim of institutional rigidity and latent prejudice. Among royal traditionalists, she's viewed as the personification of disruption. Charming on the surface, divisive beneath. King Charles's comment did not occur in a vacuum. It rippled across these divides, solidifying views on both sides. For those already critical of the monarchy, it reinforced the idea that the palace has never fully reckoned with Meghan's mistreatment. For supporters of the crown, it validated long-held suspicions that Harry's actions were simply extensions of a destabilizing influence they wish had never entered royal life. But beyond the politics and media frenzy lies a deeply human truth. Meghan's name continues to hurt because it represents unresolved trauma. For Charles, for William, for Camilla, for Kate, for all of them, really, the saga of Harry and Meghan is not just a public embarrassment. It is a personal failure, one that no amount of charitable appearances or reconciliatory gestures can mask. The tragedy, of course, is that Meghan herself, regardless of motive, has become more of a symbol than a person in this unfolding drama. To the royal family, she is the disruptor. To the media, she is a headline. To the public, she is either a heroine or a villain. But in the walls of that palace, where the echo of her name triggers disdain, she remains a ghost that no one can quite exorcise. When King Charles likened Harry's behavior to Meghan's, he reignited not only personal animosities but public ones as well. And in doing so, he may have unintentionally reminded the world that reconciliation was never going to be as simple as an invitation to a sporting event. Healing would require something far deeper, a reckoning with what Meghan's presence truly meant for the royal family and what their response to her revealed about themselves. As the news of Prince Harry's invitation to the 2027 Invictus Games rippled through the highest ranks of the British monarchy, the mood inside Buckingham Palace shifted from quiet frustration to strategic paralysis. It was not just the timing or tone of the invite that complicated matters, it was the impossible question it posed to the royal family. What happens when the institution's greatest vulnerability is extended an olive branch in public view? For the royal household, the dilemma wasn't simply about attendance, it was about perception, precedent, and power. By tradition, royal engagements are orchestrated with painstaking precision. Calendars are locked in months, even years, in advance. Each appearance, each handshake, each speech is calibrated to uphold the image and values of the crown. But Harry's invitation threw that system into chaos. It was not run through the proper diplomatic channels. It was not cleared with staff. And most importantly, it was public before the royals could privately deliberate. The family's options were few and fraught with consequence. If they chose to attend, they would be entering Harry's world on his terms. Not only would this undermine the family's long-standing position that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex had stepped back from royal duties, but it would also risk validating Harry's post-royal projects, which had often served as platforms to subtly critique the institution. On the other hand, declining the invitation could be seen as vindictive, punishing a veteran-focused cause for the sake of family pride. Inside the palace, factions quickly emerged. Some courtiers argued in favor of strategic engagement. "He's reaching out," one senior advisor reportedly said during a closed-door meeting. "We don't have to embrace him, but we should show the public that we're not above grace." Others were not so forgiving. A close aide to Prince William was blunt in his assessment. "It's not reconciliation, it's a trap." He knows exactly how this looks. We say no, and he plays the victim again. We say yes, and we endorse everything he's done these last few years. The weight of the decision fell most heavily on three people: King Charles, Prince William, and Princess Anne. As monarch, Charles held the final word. As heir, William represented the future. As the family's most respected figure of duty and discipline and embodied tradition, King Charles, having already expressed his personal dismay in private, leaned toward non-engagement. His reasoning was simple. Harry had chosen to separate himself from the monarchy. Inviting them now, especially to an event wrapped in international attention and emotional gravitas, was not a genuine attempt at reunion. It was, in his view, a manipulation of sentiment. William's stance was even more rigid. Despite their shared past and the years of brotherhood forged in the shadow of their mother's death, William saw Harry's latest move as yet another provocation. He had grown tired of forgiving, tired of being portrayed as cold and calculating while Harry claimed emotional authenticity in every interview. To William, showing up to the Invictus Games wasn't a family gesture, it was ammunition for the next round of media framing. Princess Anne, known for her stoic realism and directness, offered a third perspective. While not particularly sympathetic to Harry, she recognized the optics at play. In her opinion, ignoring the invitation outright would only amplify the division. But even she could not deny the complexity of the situation. "We don't want to become the story at a veterans event," she reportedly said. "But we don't want to make the story worse by refusing to go." The family's inner circle spent days assessing possible responses. Could they send a representative instead of a senior royal? Could they issue a statement supporting the games without attending? Would it be worse to attend without engaging with Harry directly? Meanwhile, palace press officers were inundated with media queries. Will the king attend? Will Prince William make an appearance? Is this the moment of royal reconciliation? With every passing hour, the pressure mounted. Public relations experts warned that staying silent too long could be interpreted as passive rejection. Yet saying anything too soon could lock them into a narrative they couldn't control. Behind closed doors, scenarios were played out in granular detail. If Charles attended, would he sit beside Harry or at a distance? If William appeared, would there be a handshake? What would happen if the press caught even a slight frown, an awkward glance, or a missed opportunity to smile? The family had endured decades of media scrutiny, but never before had the stakes felt so uniquely personal and publicly complex. Unlike other public events where protocol could be followed to the letter, the Invictus Games carried an emotional weight. Veterans, many of them personally connected to Harry, had already begun speaking in favor of unity. Public opinion was leaning in Harry's favor, framing the invitation as a brave gesture by a son seeking peace. This created additional tension within the palace. Some argued that continuing to snub Harry only fueled the narrative that the monarchy was cold and unwilling to evolve. Younger audiences, especially, had grown weary of the royal family's perceived rigidity. Surveys showed that public support for Harry and Meghan remained strong among millennials and Gen Z, even as older generations leaned more conservative. Inside Kensington Palace, Prince William was said to be visibly frustrated by the media's framing. "They forget what he's done," he told a confidant. "They forget how many times we've tried behind the scenes. Now he invites us once, and suddenly he's the peacemaker." The press was also speculating about Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Her absence from public view in recent months had already triggered a swirl of conspiracy theories. Adding her name to the conversation about the Invictus Games only intensified the spotlight. Some believed that if she were to attend, it could single-handedly change the public's perception of the family's stance. Others feared it would put her in an impossible position, caught between royal duty and familial tension. The dilemma extended even to the minor royals. Could Prince Edward or Sophie, Countess of Wessex, attend without triggering political consequences? Could Princess Beatrice or Princess Eugenie, known to have warmer relations with Harry, make a personal visit without it being seen as an endorsement from the crown? With each passing day, the story grew more convoluted. Every silent hour from the palace allowed speculation to run unchecked. Editorials began appearing in major papers. One London columnist wrote, "The monarchy must decide, cling to tradition, or show a shred of humanity." Meanwhile, veterans groups continued to voice their opinions. Many acknowledged the tension but called for the royal family to rise above it. "This event isn't about who hurt who," one British soldier wrote in an open letter. "It's about recovery. If the royal family can't put their pride aside for that, What message does it send to us? The royal family, of course, was not unaware of these pleas. But the issue was never just about pride. For them, it was about precedent. If they accepted this invitation, what came next? Would they be expected to attend Harry's next documentary screening? Would Meghan be reintroduced into official public engagements? Would the public begin to push for a complete reintegration of the Sussexes? The family was not just navigating a personal rift, they were managing the perception of a constitutional monarchy. And in that role, consistency mattered. Rules mattered. Appearances mattered. After a week of deliberation, Charles was said to have made his position clear during a private meeting. No appearance, no official statement, and no commentary on the invitation. His message to his aides was curt: this is not the time, and this is not the way. The decision, while internally unified, left an air of unease. Many within the palace feared that this would only deepen the public perception of dysfunction. But the choice was made not because they did not care, but because they believed the crown must remain unbending in the face of emotional manipulation. And so the invitation that might have bridged a chasm ended up exposing it further. In trying to unite his family, Harry had inadvertently forced them into a dilemma that could not be solved with diplomacy or protocol. Only time, and perhaps something more genuine than a public gesture, could heal the fractures now laid bare. As the royal family deliberated silently behind palace walls, the outside world erupted. With no official response forthcoming from King Charles or Buckingham Palace, the media space became a battlefield of narratives, speculation, and emotional appeals. The vacuum left by the royals' silence was quickly filled with outrage, curiosity, and debate, fueled by news anchors, opinion writers, social media users, and commentators across both sides of the Atlantic. At first, reports focused on the contents of Harry's invitation. Leaked segments of the letter made their way into broadsheets and tabloids alike, framing it as an earnest and measured attempt at reconciliation. A bid for unity, read one headline. Harry hopes to mend bridges through service, declared another. But as word of King Charles's alleged comment, referring to Harry as being as mad as his wife, began circulating, the tone changed dramatically. The leak came not through an official channel, but through a royal insider quoted anonymously in a major Sunday paper. Whether intentional or accidental, the quote added fuel to an already burning fire. Talk shows seized on the phrase, political commentators debated its implications, and late-night comedians turned it into punchlines. Within 24 hours, Mad as Meghan was trending on X, formerly Twitter, sparking global reactions from both critics and supporters of the monarchy. In the UK, traditional royalists expressed support for King Charles's sentiments, framing the remark as a long-overdue expression of royal frustration. Letters to the editor flooded newspapers like The Times and the Daily Telegraph, with many praising the king for not caving to what they described as emotional blackmail. On popular British radio shows, callers debated whether the royal family had any obligation to respond to Harry's invitation at all. Yet across the Atlantic, the reaction was strikingly different. In the United States, the media narrative tilted in Harry's favor. Outlets like the New York Times, CNN, and People magazine framed the event as a missed opportunity for healing. Headlines included phrases like "royal cold shoulder" and "Harry's olive branch rejected." Talk show hosts and celebrities began to weigh in. Some called the silence from Buckingham Palace chilling. Others accused the monarchy of hypocrisy, praising service and charity in public, while shunning their own family members' effort to uplift wounded veterans. The contrast in coverage highlighted more than just geographic differences. It revealed a deeper divide in values and perceptions of what the modern monarchy should represent. In Britain, a sense of duty and institutional preservation remained central. In the U.S., individual expression and emotional transparency were celebrated. Harry, having planted himself firmly in American soil both literally and ideologically, found greater sympathy among audiences there. But it wasn't just journalists and pundits who were talking. Social media became the loudest arena of all. On Instagram, viral posts circulated excerpts of Harry's invitation, overlaid with photos of him in military uniform, saluting wounded soldiers. On TikTok, influencers dramatized the situation in short, emotional clips, often set to moody music and concluding with open-ended questions. Was this Harry's last chance? How long will the royal family keep pretending he doesn't exist? On Facebook and YouTube, royal watchers uploaded reaction videos dissecting every known detail. The content ranged from highly emotional defenses of Harry to analytical takes on the monarchy's public image crisis. One video titled, "King Charles Just Made the Biggest Mistake of His Reign," received over 3 million views in less than 72 hours. The top comment read, "He had one job, be a father." Veterans organizations around the world began weighing in too, many of them uncomfortable with how the narrative was shifting away from Invictus' mission. Statements from the Invictus Foundation urged the media and public alike to keep the focus on the competitors, not the conflict. But even those messages, meant to preserve the sanctity of the games, became part of the wider debate. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan's media team remained silent, strategically so. There were no rebuttals, no clarifying interviews, and no appearances. Their refusal to comment was interpreted as a sign of dignity by some and a calculated PR move by others. For Meghan especially, this was a rare moment of restraint. Her name was once again front and center in global headlines, yet she made no effort to control or redirect the narrative. That silence allowed the drama to unfold naturally and dramatically in the public arena. Within the British media, palace loyalists fought to control the message. Royal correspondents began releasing articles and op-eds aimed at reframing the situation. "This is not about family," one article in the Daily Mail argued. "It's about institution." Prince Harry walked away from his responsibilities. He cannot now expect to be treated as if nothing happened. But those defenses did little to calm the tide of public sympathy. For many people, especially younger audiences and international viewers, the issue wasn't about duty. It was about decency. Why wouldn't the royal family accept an invitation to a non-political, charitable event? What harm could come from a symbolic moment of solidarity? Even a polite refusal with a warm statement would have been better than the total radio silence that followed. Online petitions began circulating, urging the king and senior royals to reconsider. One Change.org petition, titled "King Charles, Attend the Invictus Games and Stand with Veterans," gained over 150,000 signatures within a week. The comments were filled with emotional pleas. "Please show your son that healing is possible. Do it for Diana, she would have gone." This is bigger than family drama. It's about unity. The backlash even reached Parliament. During a session in the House of Commons, a backbench MP referenced the situation indirectly, stating, "It would serve the nation well if the Crown supported veterans wherever they are honored." Though the comment was met with polite applause, it underscored the growing sense that this story was no longer confined to family. It had become a national talking point. Back at Buckingham Palace, press officers found themselves overwhelmed. Calls came in nonstop. Requests for interviews, for clarification, for comment. Each time, the official line remained unchanged: no comment. Internally, however, the pressure was mounting. Aides were divided between maintaining discipline and acknowledging that silence might be doing more harm than good. Some advisors suggested issuing a short statement praising the Invictus Games without committing to attendance. Others urged Charles to speak personally, to show that the crown was not as emotionally sterile as critics claimed. But Charles, still bruised by the events of recent years, remained steadfast. To him, bending now would only set a dangerous precedent. It would imply that media pressure could dictate royal behavior. And that, in his eyes, was unacceptable. The crisis management meetings intensified. Strategy briefings now included simulations of how to handle hypothetical questions during upcoming engagements. What if someone asks about Harry on camera? What do we do if a protester shouts during a walkabout? Every angle was explored, every risk calculated. Despite the efforts to maintain composure, the royal family's image took a noticeable hit. Polls began to shift. A major survey conducted 2 weeks after the story broke showed a dip in approval ratings for both King Charles and Prince William. Meanwhile, Harry's favorability, especially among younger Britons, saw a modest rise. It was a reminder that public opinion is fluid, and even the most carefully maintained reputations can be vulnerable to unexpected waves. Ultimately, the Invictus invitation had achieved what no other event since the Queen's funeral could. It thrust the internal pain of the royal family back into the spotlight. And unlike previous scandals, this one didn't involve leaked audio or ghost-written memoirs. It involved a letter, private in intent, but global in impact. The media frenzy showed no signs of slowing. Reporters began arriving in Toronto months ahead of the games, anticipating that the drama would carry through to the opening ceremony. Every camera would be watching to see who showed up and who didn't. Every shot of Harry would be analyzed. Would he mention his family in his speech? Would he wear a pin, a flower, or carry any symbol of royal connection? Would there be a public message of reconciliation or a silent rebuke? In the court of public opinion, narratives shift quickly. But in this moment, at this particular intersection of family and legacy, the tide was turning against the crown. Whether they chose to engage or not, the royal family had once again lost control of the narrative. And in doing so, they may have unwittingly given Harry exactly what he wanted, the upper hand. In the chaos that followed Prince Harry's invitation to the 2027 Invictus Games, observers on both sides of the Atlantic found themselves grappling with a deeply polarizing question. Was this a genuine plea for peace or a carefully timed strategic move? Depending on whom you asked, the answer varied dramatically. To some, Harry was the estranged son desperately trying to bridge a chasm widened by years of silence and miscommunication. To others, he was a man cleverly wielding a global stage to exert pressure on a royal institution that had consistently rebuffed his attempts to redefine tradition. The truth, as always, was far more complicated. For Harry, Invictus has never been just a public service project. It is personal. Born out of his own military service and the bonds he formed with wounded veterans during his time on the front lines, the Games were always a manifestation of his desire to uplift those who, like him, bore the invisible scars of war. When he launched the inaugural Invictus Games in 2014, the applause was nearly unanimous. Even within the palace, the event was viewed as a shining example of a royal finding his own voice. But that was before the rupture, before Harry stepped away from royal duties, before the Oprah interview, before Spare, and before the fracturing of public and familial trust. So when Harry extended the invitation to his father and other senior royals, some believed the gesture to be one rooted in memory, purpose, and hope. Sources close to the Sussexes claimed Harry saw the Games as sacred ground, neutral territory where reconciliation could begin not with words, but with presence. In his mind, the royal family didn't need to make grand speeches or pose for stage photographs. Simply being there, in the audience, supporting veterans, would send a powerful message that despite everything, family could still stand together for something greater than themselves. This narrative resonated deeply with many in the public sphere. Veteran organizations across the UK and Commonwealth spoke out in support of the gesture, with some leaders arguing that healing in the military community required examples of leadership and humility. One veteran, who served with Harry in Afghanistan, wrote an open letter to the palace saying, "If Prince Harry can extend his hand, surely the rest of the family can find the courage to take it." But others, particularly within the palace and British media circles, weren't buying it. Critics argued that the timing was suspicious. The invitation had been delivered without prior private communication, then leaked within days to the press. The result? A tidal wave of public sympathy and a reinvigoration of Harry's image as the wounded son trying to make amends. To them, this was a classic Sussex strategy: bypass the protocol, control the narrative, and corner the monarchy into a response. Some royal aides, speaking anonymously, described the invitation as a Trojan horse, carefully crafted to appear conciliatory but ultimately meant to expose the royal family's unwillingness to forgive. There's some precedent for this skepticism. Since their departure from senior royal roles, Harry and Meghan have proven adept at shaping media narratives to their advantage. From their high-profile interviews to their Netflix series and book releases, the couple has consistently highlighted their emotional pain, institutional neglect, and the moral high ground they believe they occupy. Within this framework, the invitation to Invictus felt less like a peace offering and more like a strategic move. An attempt to reset the public narrative and cast the royals as aloof and unkind, all while Harry presented himself as the son reaching across a broken bridge. Yet intention is a difficult thing to measure from the outside. Those who know Harry personally insist that the invitation came from a place of vulnerability, not calculation. A close friend reportedly told a journalist that Harry was devastated by the family's cold response. He didn't want headlines. He wanted his father and brother there. That's all. Indeed, there were signs that Harry had taken steps toward reconciliation in the months leading up to the invitation. He attended King Charles's coronation alone, despite the tension surrounding his presence. He made no public remarks critical of the event. He sat quietly, left quietly, and did not seek the spotlight. For many, this behavior was proof that he was trying, slowly, carefully, to mend fences without escalating drama. Furthermore, insiders say that Harry had even broached the idea of inviting his family to Invictus during private discussions with trusted mutual acquaintances. These conversations were reportedly exploratory, informal, and filled with uncertainty. Harry knew the risk. He knew they might say no. but he believed the games were important enough to take the risk. Still, the method of delivery and the lack of follow-up communication left many within the royal family baffled. Why not pick up the phone? Why not send a private note or request a meeting before issuing such a public invitation? These questions fueled the narrative that Harry wasn't just reaching out. He was cornering them. What further complicated the situation was Harry's media silence in the wake of the palace's refusal. By choosing not to engage, not to defend himself, and not to release any formal statement, Harry allowed public opinion to swell in his favor. This, too, was interpreted in multiple ways. Some called it maturity. Others called it manipulation. Royal historian Jonathan Milesley summarized the moment succinctly in an editorial: Prince Harry knows the power of silence. When the palace refuses and he doesn't respond, he lets the world draw its own conclusions. That silence speaks louder than any interview. As the story gained momentum, the emotional weight of the situation became harder to ignore. For all the political and institutional maneuvering, this was still a story about a family in crisis. A son who once walked behind his mother's coffin now found himself walking alone again, this time by choice, but no less burdened. A father who had weathered national tragedy and personal scandal now found himself unable or unwilling to open the door to his youngest child. For many, the question became less about whether Harry's gesture was strategic and more about whether the royal family had lost the capacity to forgive. In an age where the public craves emotional honesty over institutional rigidity, the monarchy's refusal to even acknowledge the invitation appeared increasingly out of touch. The situation also raised broader concerns about the institution's future. If the royal family couldn't navigate its own internal divisions, how could it hope to remain relevant to a diverse and evolving nation? What message did it send to younger generations who value transparency, mental health awareness, and emotional vulnerability? Prince Harry, for better or worse, embodies many of these modern ideals. He talks openly about trauma. He champions mental health. He builds platforms like INVICTUS not as royal duties but as personal missions. To many, this makes him relatable, perhaps even more royal in spirit than the ones who remain within the system. But relatability isn't enough to repair a broken family. And despite all the sympathy and support, the core issue remains unresolved. The invitation was sent. It was rejected. And now, each side is left nursing fresh wounds inflicted in the name of peace. Was Harry's move sincere? Was it a tactical play? Maybe it was both. Maybe, like so many things in fractured families, the act came from a tangled place where longing and strategy are impossible to separate. One thing, however, is certain: the silence from the palace only amplified the gesture. And in doing so,